Hello, everyone. Welcome to our 2018 Empowered Life series put on by the Essential Wellness community. My name is Aisha Harley, and it's an absolute pleasure to be with all of you that are tuning in from around the globe. I just absolutely love that we can meet here and learn and grow together. We have such an important topic that I think affects all of us as human beings. If you're a human being, this is something that we all have to deal with, and some of us it affects to different degrees. But chronic stress is definitely a precursor for much more serious illnesses and health complications. So it's definitely something to give attention to and learn how to manage and keep in balance in your life. And we have Dr. Louise Rose here today, who is a specialist in this field. So we are super excited, and her presentation is amazing. You're going to want to definitely take notes and really pay close attention because she covers a lot of content today. So I want to tell you a little bit more about her. Dr. Louise Rose is a naturopathic physician. She is a former chef, and I'll say an amazing chef, still a chef, always a chef, right? If you ever get the chance to eat one of her meals, they are divine, especially in her backyard. And she is a neuroplastician. She helps people get out of stuck neural grooves and stimulates new brain connections. She believes in the profound healing power of nature, particularly the therapeutic action of water, plants, and light. Working with patients at Rose Cabinet Medicine in Northeast Portland, Oregon, she helps people reconnect with their inner vitality, increase their energy, and become more emotionally resilient. So I am going to pass the presentation over to you, Dr. Rose. Thank you so much for taking this time out of, I'm sure, your busy day and sharing with our global community.
Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction, Aisha. And I'm so happy to be here with all of you. Thanks for tuning in live. I see. We're gonna, buckle your seatbelts. We're gonna cover a lot of material here, like Aisha said, and I'll have some time and space for questions at the end. So if you have a question that comes up, make sure you jot it down or put it in the chat box. It's a big topic. So this is the slide that I used to use when I would introduce myself at a talk. But this year I've been doing a lot of inner growth work and went to the doTERRA leadership retreat last March, where we did the Strengths Finder test. And I learned a lot more about how to be more of who I really am naturally. So as you can see, my top 3 strengths are input, intellection, and learner, which means I love more than anything studying and learning, and stress, trauma, and essential oils might be my 3 favorite topics to learn about. So it's really a privilege and a pleasure for me to be able to kind of try to synthesize some of what I've learned and share it on a broader scale. What I really want to tell you about, though, is my strength as a maximizer, because when I realized that this is one of my strengths and kind of learned more about what it means, I realized that it informs my whole philosophy about health and wellness. And so it might be useful for you to learn a little bit about it too. So like Aisha said, I was a chef for many years, and being a maximizer in the chef context looks like I almost never make the same recipe twice, even if it turned out great. I always want to improve on it. I'm always looking for how to take things from good to great. And whether that's nutritionally or flavor or optimally both, you want to increase the flavor and increase the nutrients that you're getting out of your food. So this here is a picture of my famous bone broth that I make. And I'm sure many of you have learned about the amazing healing benefits of bone broth, just cooking bones for a really long time with a little bit of vinegar and maybe some onions and garlic and carrots and celery. You pull all the nutrients out of the joints and the bones, and it becomes a really mineral rich, delicious, nutrient, easily absorbed food, like almost like a superfood. Well, I had to make it better. I had to use my maximizer skill. So I developed what I call supercharged bone broth, where I put in seaweed and medicinal mushrooms like shiitake and maitake and reishi mushrooms, small handful of dried elderberries for their antiviral content, and then a bunch of different herbs that can then help support the immune system. And if you're interested in learning more about my bone broth recipe, I did make an ebook, and you can go to my website at rosecabinetmedicine.com and download it for free. But that is kind of the general idea of how a maximizer works. So how does this fit into my philosophy of health? Well, think about making a soup. If you're making a soup from scratch, oftentimes you'd start by sauteing some onions, maybe some garlic. You might add in some salt. Then next layer, you want to add in your chopped celery and carrots. Almost any kind of soup is going to start out like that. It provides a base flavor. Then you're going to add your supercharged bone broth, of course, and whatever else you're making soup out of, whether it's more vegetables or lentils or some chicken or whatever you're going to use. So it's all these different layers, and then you're going to taste it, and then you're going to adjust the seasoning, add more salt and pepper. It's all the different layers of flavor that really make soup wonderful. It would not taste the same if you threw a bunch of carrots in a pot, covered them with water, and boiled them. That would be a pretty boring soup. So I think about health and wellness that way too. Our modern medical model kind of waits until you have a big enough problem that's going to show up in your labs or under a microscope or something under an MRI, and then you have to intervene really in a big way with medicine or surgery or something like that. And the model of healthcare that I really have a lot of faith and hope in is this idea that if we're adding in small things that we know are going to increase our health and resiliency on a daily basis, then we won't need to use those big guns, or hopefully we won't need to use those big guns. So the reason I'm telling you about this is partly because in this talk, I'm going to give you a whole bunch of different oils and ideas of things that might help when you're working with chronic stress and healing from trauma. I don't want you to feel overwhelmed by that. I'm not suggesting that you do every single thing that I'm going to talk about every day. What I'd like you to do is just really sit back and enjoy the talk and take notes, and maybe 1, 2, or possibly 3 ideas from the talk are really going to resonate with you. And what I want you to do is try that. Try adding in 1 or 2 or maybe 3 new protocols into your daily life for 3 or 4 weeks. Give it a good shot. And then once you feel comfortable with that and you can kind of gauge how it's feeling in your body and how it's working in your life, then you can go back and add in another layer. So that's one way that we can keep from just jumping from one thing to the next and feeling overwhelmed with too much information. The other thing that I'd like to just comment on is that essential oils are a perfect way to add in layers of wellness to our daily life because they work best in small, frequent daily doses. And the reason is because they're they're volatile oils, so they're quick moving molecules. They go into our bodies and they get quickly incorporated into our tissues and our blood. And then they get quickly cleared out of our system as well. So you're going to have the most benefit if you incorporate them in small doses throughout the day. So why am I so passionate about trauma work and essential oils and healing from chronic stress? Well, one of my inspirations these days is Adrienne Maree Brown's book, Emergent Strategies. And she says that losing our imagination is a symptom of trauma. And I really believe that when we have unresolved trauma in our lives, we're stuck. We're stuck in a kind of a repeating cycle, and our life gets very narrow because we're trying to avoid things that are going to make us feel worse. And I would like to suggest that the more people in our world that can heal and resolve these traumatic experiences and these patterns of chronic stress, the more we can regain our imagination. And I would like to join with you, hopefully, it's my hope, that we can imagine a world together that's free from war, free from violence. What about a world where there's liberation for everybody and abundance? That's how I'd like to spend my time, is reclaiming that imagination for the future. Hope you can join me there. So these are kind of all of the different ways, I like to learn things. I like to input new information. And so there are a bunch of different lenses through which I study how essential oils work in our health and wellness and in our bodies. So you can look at the chemistry and physiology and how, what enzymes are affected and what actions happen as a result of taking an essential oil that has a certain chemistry. There's lots of great resources. Our wonderful resource, Ariana Harley, does a call once a month on the emotional aspects of the oils. And there's a great book as well that teaches us a lot about how we can work with the emotions and essential oils. And then fragrance energetics refers to a study that I've been really diving into in the last few years with a couple teachers. This comes through the Chinese medicine philosophy and background, and refers to, when you have a fragrance, how does it affect the qi flow and the energy flow in the body? So you'll probably instinctively understand that certain oils like lemon lift your energy and are clarifying, and other oils like patchouli are sinking, your energy sinks and grounds and stabilizes. So it goes into a little more depth with that. And I'm definitely going to be using a lot of that information in this talk. So that's what I mean by fragrance energetics. And then I am also a huge fan of using our own personal intuition and perhaps meditating with a particular oil to gain deeper insight into how that oil wants to be used and what it wants to tell us about how its medicine is. And if you don't have any experience with this, you can simply open a bottle and set your intention and see what comes up, and then maybe set a timer for 7 or 8 minutes. If you run out of things that are going on in your brain, you can just ask, smell it again and ask, what do you want me to know? Patchouli or vetiver, whichever oil you're meditating with. But there's also a wonderful book by Dr. Mika Carew, one of our colleagues here in Portland, who wrote a book called Plant Spirit Medicine. And she tells you how to do that kind of practice yourself. I highly recommend it. It's a great resource. And then some of the information that I'm going to pass on today just comes from my own personal and clinical experience. I use essential oils with every single one of my patients. And so over the years, I've been lucky enough to gather information that way. So this is kind of an outline of what I want to go through today. My goal is to give you some substantive information about the nervous system and how it's affected by chronic stress or trauma, without boring you or going into so much depth that you're going to be the next doctor. Hopefully it's going to be meaty, but not too overwhelming. And then I have many instances where I try to bring in hope, because sometimes when we study stress and trauma, it seems really hopeless and difficult. And there are a lot of different tools that I'm gonna share with you that you can use starting today to help heal from some of this stuff. Just give you a minute here to read this slide. We're talking about regulating our emotions, and consequently, the opposite is that our emotions and our autonomic nervous system gets dysregulated with trauma. So when I talk about self-regulation, that's what we're going to be regaining as we heal from trauma. And self-regulation basically just means that when we're tired, we can sleep. When we're stressed, we have healthy ways to release that stress. And emotional regulation is, all emotions are normal human experiences. And what I like to say is that it's not really a problem to have an emotion unless you get stuck in that emotion and you can't see that there are a whole range of other emotions that you could have, or you get stuck in repeating. It's almost like you're standing in a room and you're standing in the corner looking at the wall, and you can't tell that there's a whole other world out there. So dysregulated emotional affect happens when we get stuck. And so we're going to be, hopefully with self-regulation, we're going to be opening up to bigger capacity of emotional wellness and resiliency. So this is the normal arousal cycle. When I talk about the arousal cycle, what I mean is how does the nervous system respond to any sort of threat or danger? And I'd also like to point out that our nervous systems respond to perceived threats or danger. It doesn't have to actually be a real threat or danger. Our example here is responding to a tiger. And when you're studying stress physiology, you hear that analogy all the time. It's always running from a tiger. And the reason is because back in when, human beings were evolutionarily in, paleo days, those were our big stressors, were running from predators. And then we would have that arousal cycle where we would activate our nervous system so that we could respond to the threat. But then once the threat is over, you're either alive or dead. If you're dead, your stress response is over. And if you're still alive, you go back down. You go back down to, you shake it off, you recover, and you go back to a relaxation state. So the cycle goes something like this. We're challenged or threatened. We start to arouse our nervous system to respond to the threat. And then the activity comes down the other side and we go back to rest and relaxation. So what happens in trauma is that whole cycle is unresolved. So you go up into the arousal phase, and it's coupled with paralyzing fear and feeling hopeless and immobile and unable to act. And instead of coming down the other side, we get stuck in that cycle of hypervigilance and feeling like the threat is still there even after the danger has passed. So because of this fear, traumatized people can avoid and prevent the completion of the cycle, and they remain stuck in that pattern. And one of the first things that we need to do to start healing from trauma is learn to trust the rise and fall of the cycle, that even if you feel activated, it's okay, because you have mechanisms to learn how to come down out of that activation. And when we have trauma that is unresolved, oftentimes we do everything we can to avoid any of those activation feelings, but understanding that it's part of the healing process will help. So this is what's going on in the nervous system with that arousal cycle. And you see here two sides, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. So we think of the sympathetic nervous system as responding to threat or danger, and we call that the fight or flight response. And then the parasympathetic happens when the danger's over and we go back to that rest and digest part of the nervous system. And they don't usually happen at the same time. So when our sympathetic nervous system gets turned on, our parasympathetic gets turned off. There is one exception that I'm going to tell you about in a few slides. But in normal everyday life, this is how it works. So one thing you'll notice is when our sympathetic nervous system gets turned on, our digestion shuts down. It's not a very mandatory thing that we digest our food well in order to survive a threat like running from a tiger. And so our body shifts its energy towards things that are going to mobilize our big muscles so we can run away or fight, widening our eyesight so we can take in the whole scene and perceive what's going on well. Our adrenaline surges, our blood vessels constrict, oftentimes our heart rate speeds up. And you can imagine that this stress response that was very useful back in paleo days when we had plenty of time in between stressful events, we'd come back down and live a pretty relaxed lifestyle. But that's not really the way our lives are anymore. So what happens now in modern times is that our stress response can get triggered by any perceived threat, either physical threat, emotional threat, or threat to our ego. And our body responds in these primitive ways to the perceived threat. But oftentimes it's a threat like, I'm going to be late for work. I'm stuck in traffic and I'm going to be late for work. So your body activates in order to be able to run away or fight, but yet you're stuck in traffic and you're not running away or fighting. And so all that adrenaline and all those hormones and stuff kind of don't get discharged, and they end up building up into chronic stress patterns where we see high blood pressure, chronic pain, difficulties in the body where we're not relaxed, insomnia, digestive complaints, hormone dysregulation, so many different downstream effects of having that chronic elevated stress. Let's see if there's anything else I want to add there. Just that the limbic system in our brain really pays attention to really stressful experiences. And the reason is because our brain is geared towards survival. It is it's more important to the brain that we survive than we be happy. And so the limbic system, especially if there's a stressful situation that has a high emotional charge, it really like takes a snapshot of that experience so that it can try to avoid, so it can try to help you avoid that situation in the future. So if you start to feel those same feelings come up of danger or threat, the limbic system says, oh, I remember this is dangerous, and it kicks into high gear really quickly. So you can imagine in somebody who has several major stressors or traumatic events, that system in the brain gets sort of primed to expect more danger. It's a feedback loop. All right, so this is the work of Stephen Porges, who came up with the polyvagal theory. And I know it's a pretty busy slide and it could seem really overwhelming. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time here and try to break it down for you to help, help it be more understandable. Because this is the money. This is the money slide right here. It's got a lot of juicy stuff. So you see we have the green area at the bottom, which is called the social engagement area. So this is where we have our parasympathetic nervous system, the ventral vagal part of the parasympathetic nervous system on board, and it's in charge. The sympathetic is relaxing for now. And so we're able to feel a sense of safety, which then allows our interpersonal skills to come on. We're able to orient towards people and engage. We're able to feel our bodies. We're able to be present in the present moment. And this is where we develop a lot of our mammalian connection to other people and feelings of compassion. So ideally, we would be living in this green area most of the time. However, you notice that little wiggly line there, and that refers to normal everyday stressors that start to take us up into sympathetic nervous system activation. And those can be stressors like being late for work, or maybe getting a bill that you weren't expecting, or perhaps you got in a fight with your spouse or a child and you start to get activated, but then you have tools and you realize, your cognitive brain figures out that it's not really that big of a threat. And so then you come back down the other side of that nervous system arousal curve, back into the green, back into the safety, social engagement. So that's a normal flow. I mean, we can't expect to not ever have any stressors, and we're designed to handle stressors quite well in this way, where we respond and then we come back down. So that's one scenario. Now, if the threat is a bigger threat, or if it doesn't stop, or if it keeps increasing, our nervous system is going to continue up that curve into the sympathetic, into the red area. And so you notice that there's two sides of that curve. One is called flight, one is called fight. And you can see the different levels of arousal that you have with both of those. So in the beginning, when you're just starting to perceive the threat, you might feel worried or concerned. And then as it increases, you start to really have a lot of anxiety about it. And then it builds to panic and fear. If the arousal curve continues and you can't act against it, you can't get away from it, and you can't stop it, you eventually reach a point where your nervous system, in its wisdom, has a third coping mechanism, which is the freeze cycle. So fight, flight, or freeze. Freeze is what happens when you pass that threshold, that dotted line, into overwhelm. So you'll notice in the red, it's I can, and then in the blue, it's I can't. So the threshold there, the dotted line, is going to be different for each person in each situation. but it's whenever your nervous system decides, it's not a conscious decision, that the threat is too overwhelming to fight or to run away from, and it's safer to go into freeze. So freeze can look like all sorts of these things. That you can dissociate from your body. You can literally feel paralyzed, like you can't move, shut down, you can't process, maybe your vision goes really small. And this is a place of helplessness and paralysis and preparation for death, really, and collapse. So as you'll notice, in order to come out of that, so let's say you're in a situation where you experience freeze, dissociation, and this overwhelming trauma, as you come down the other side of the activation curve, you're probably going to start feeling a lot of that adrenaline and that discharge activity, which can be really frightening. And sometimes people suppress that. I'm talking about things like shaking uncontrollably or sobbing uncontrollably or other sorts of physical discharges. What you're doing is you're actually moving all that adrenaline and that fight or flight energy out of your body. So sometimes that deactivation side of the arousal curve doesn't happen in a supported and healthy way, and that's when people kind of get stuck in that post-traumatic stress situation of stuck in that unresolved trauma. So you might notice that the green area down here is dominated by your parasympathetic nervous system. And then the activation is your sympathetic nervous system. And that's sort of like putting, if you're driving a car, it's like stepping on the gas. So you're moving towards mobilizing everything you can to deal with this stressor. And then when you hit the blue, you actually go back into the dorsal vagal part of the parasympathetic nervous system, which is a very old part of our nervous system, prehistoric, reptilian part of our brain. And it is like slamming on the brakes. So when you go from sympathetic, you have the gas all the way to the floor, and then you hit the dorsal vagal into the freeze response, and you slam on the brakes. And so it might feel in your body like you have both gas full throttle and brakes full throttle, and it's really uncomfortable. Let's see if there's anything else I want to say there about that. Yes, there is. And so just to back up a little bit, when we're young babies and young children, our nervous system is not actually fully developed yet. And as mammals, that it takes a long time for kids to go through all their developmental stages to where they're fully grown up. And in the beginning, our parents and our caregivers act as a sort of a outside nervous system to help children learn how to self-regulate themselves and their nervous system. So you can imagine if you're a parent and you have a toddler and you go to the park one day just to play, and your child is on the merry-go-round and an older bully pushes your child off the merry-go-round while it's going around. So the child has experienced both this violation, this emotional violation of somebody, doing violence to them, and then also the physical violation of, it hurts to fall off a merry-go-round, and they're probably feeling really shaken up. So you go get the child and you pick it up and you bring it back, and the child's probably crying, and you put it on your lap and you rock and you stroke and you pat, and you might be cooing kind, safe, gentle words in a nice sing-songy voice. all of those things, and you're breathing, you're not freaking out, you know the child's going to be okay, so you're feeling calm and you're focused on helping bring the child back into the self-regulated state. And what the child's nervous system learns from that experience is, oh, I can have a stressful experience, but mom says I'm going to be okay, and I know that with a little hug and a little rocking and a little self-regulation, I can come back down and go back and play again. So that's kind of a normal way that a parent helps the child's nervous system learn how to self-regulate itself when they're young. So you can imagine a different scenario where perhaps you were born into a family whose caregivers or parents were not very well self-regulated emotionally themselves. Perhaps there's a high level of anxiety, and when something bad happens to the child, the parent, freaks out, and instead of comforting you, goes over and berates the other child or the other child's mom, and you never got that. It's okay. You're gonna be okay. This is how you self-regulate. You never got that on a basic intrinsic level as you were growing up. So for somebody like that, your baseline, so this curvy line on the top of the green area is sort of like your baseline safe zone. Your baseline safe zone might be elevated. You might not ever really sink all the way down into feeling comfortable and safe if you didn't have parents or caregivers who were able to give that to you. And so you might be already living in a constant state of anxiety or irritation. Well, you can imagine then that it doesn't take as much activation or perceived threat to push you up higher into the panic, rage, or freeze part of the nervous system. So another scenario that might change the baseline threshold of somebody's nervous system is ancestral or epigenetic trauma. We know actually comes down through lineage, and we can experience that on an unconscious level. For instance, if you had ancestors who were slaves or in the Holocaust, and that level of trauma it really filters down through generations. And then if you also think about cultural structures that are currently in place, such as racism and poverty, and if you're part of a marginalized group because of your religion, your race, your gender, your sense of baseline safety is not going to be the same as somebody who's part of the overculture. So your baseline nervous system might be already a little hypervigilant, watching out for expecting things to be a threat, if that makes sense. So the really important message here is that you don't know what somebody else's baseline nervous system is, and we don't know what experiences are going to be considered traumatic to somebody else, because that's a very complex issue, and it's not like you can say, well, X is a traumatic experience, but Y is not. It's going to be different for each person and each situation. All right. Hopefully I covered everything there. So bringing in some medicine now. So we think of lavender as, it's just ubiquitous when we talk about essential oils. Like, everybody's experienced lavender. It's very well researched. It's in all sorts of products. People are familiar with it. We think of it as anytime you want to calm down. And there's a reason it's very, very useful and effective for most people. I do know some people who have paradoxical reaction to lavender where it actually revs them up. And so if you use lavender and you're like, I don't know what people are talking about, it makes me anxious, just you find something else. You don't have to use it. But for most people, it is a nervous system tonic, and it helps it's restorative. So from a Chinese medicine perspective, we talk about trauma scatters the shen and constricts the heart. So the shen is our higher self, our light coming down that is unique to us, and it shines through our eyes and it rests in our heart. And when we have traumatic experiences, the shen scatters and our heart constricts, and so we don't have a place for the shen to come back and rest. And so lavender is a wonderful nervous system restorative that calms and stabilizes the qi in the heart and provides a safe resting place for the shen to come back. So you could use lavender in combination with some meditation or mindfulness, which is also training the nervous system to allow just what is to be okay, and to allow that in the present moment. Lavender, if you think of that arousal curve with the fight and the flight, it works on both sides of that. So it can release that frustration and irritability at the same time that it calms the panic and the anxiety as well. And then it's really good for moving stuck mental energy out. So remember when we talked about emotional regulation, that there's not good or bad emotions. They're all human emotions, are all okay. But when they get stuck is when they become pathological or problematic or have long-term problems. So lavender can really help move them through. And Peter Holmes is an acupuncturist who teaches a lot about essential oils and fragrance energetics. He says that it is both a habit breaker and a crisis smoother. So using lavender on a daily basis when you're healing from trauma could be very effective. It can be used aromatically, topically, and internally. And here's a couple of blends that I have clinical experience with and have seen good results with. I'm honestly would recommend them in a gel cap, but they can be really comforting in a bath or topically in the diffuser as well. And then if you're not familiar with the Serenity Restful Complex, these are soft gels that have lavender oil in them, but they also have a handful of other herbs that are calming to the nervous system, like passion flower and L-theanine, and it's a wonderful calming supplement that is marketed sort of for sleep through doTERRA, and it's really great for sleep if you have any insomnia. However, there's nothing that is going to make you sleepy in them, and so I use them with my patients during the day if they need some extra help for anxiety as well. So your ACE score refers to something called adverse childhood events. And this is the result of some really groundbreaking research that came out in the late 90s. And then there's been quite a bit of research since then that's built on this. And it's really great information. And what it says is that there's a stunning link between childhood trauma and chronic disease that people develop as adults, and including social and emotional problems. So things like heart disease, lung cancer, diabetes, autoimmune conditions, depression, violence, even being a victim of violence. And your ACE score refers to how many of these different situations, whether it's substance abuse at home or emotional abuse or these things, you get kind of a point for each one of these things that was true for you as a child. And as your score increases, your likelihood of these difficulties increase too, which is very informative for us as medical professionals who maybe aren't asking our patients about their childhood trauma or adverse childhood events, and we're just trying to treat the chronic pain or the autoimmune condition. And really what we need to do is kind of pan out and have a bigger perspective and maybe help the patient come to resolution with some of their early childhood trauma. We found out through these studies that childhood trauma was very common, even in employed white middle class, college educated homes with great health insurance. People often and usually experience more than one type of trauma. Rarely is it only sex abuse or only verbal abuse. And when children do not get their needs met, they do not learn to recognize what they need. They're unable to express their needs, and they often feel undeserving of having their needs met. Developmental trauma affects nearly 3 million people yearly, and the earlier the trauma, the younger you are, the more global the impact on the physiology and psychology. So that kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier with your nervous system is not fully developed when you're younger. So especially if the trauma happens at the hands of somebody who's supposed to be your caregiver, it can be very, very damaging. So let's take a break from all the bad news about how trauma affects us and how common it is, because this is a wonderful healing modality that we can engage when we're feeling hopeless or feeling like, oh, things are never going to change. If you have not yet seen Amy Cuddy's TED Talk, she talks a lot about power poses and the effect of our body language on our hormones. And so take the time after this or bookmark it and watch it later, because it's really profound. Striking a Wonder Woman pose with your heart open and your chest held high and your feet strong dispels this sense of feeling overwhelmed and defeated and collapsed. And I would like to suggest combining it with this amazingly beautiful blend that Ariana Harley came up with, which uses rose, which is the oil of divine love. So it's sending your body the signal and your brain the signal that you are worthy just because you are. You do not have to prove yourself. You are just worthy just the way you are. And the manuka, which is the oil of being upheld. So feeling that extra support, it gives you the sense of, I got this. And then lastly, you're going to add Litsia, which is the oil of manifestation. And the fragrance energetics of this is that it is really uplifting and activating, and it really can open your senses and help you have a new perspective on things. So if you're feeling defeated, collapsed, or under a heavy blanket of depression, try combining this beautiful blend with your power poses and see what happens. Do it every day. All right, back to the bad news. This list could be pages long. It was not possible for me to list everything that can be a long-term effect of unresolved trauma, obviously, but these are some of the really common ones. Hypervigilance refers to that state of never feeling secure and safe, like you can stop worrying about what's going to happen. Hypervigilant means that you're always on the lookout for danger, whether it's the sound that you heard or your nervous system is the threshold is out of the green and already in the red at all times. Oftentimes we'll see chronic pain in somebody that has unresolved trauma, and it often is functional or without a reason. They go to the doctor and nothing shows up on the x-ray. There was no reason for the chronic pain, and yet still it persists. So instead of just taking, Tylenol all the time to try to mask the pain, maybe working on some of the nervous system resolution issues and learning how to become more resilient and move through some of the emotions might help resolve those pains. Same is true with digestive complaints. Oftentimes, we know that chronic stress shuts down digestion. So we need to work on things to bring that back into balance. The other thing I want to touch on briefly is reenactment. And what that refers to is a very interesting phenomena where if somebody has unresolved trauma, so remember that curve, they came up, they got overwhelmed, and that they never resolved it by like shaking it off, talking it out, feeling like their shin can come back to their heart. They were comforted. They never had that resolution, and so they're stuck in that post-traumatic stress cycle. One of the ways that their psyche unconsciously tries to resolve that is by creating a situation in the future that is re-traumatizing in order to provide an opportunity to the nervous system to actually fight it off or to prevail in the traumatic situation. So it can look like almost anything, domestic violence, a woman who was abused physically at home as a child oftentimes will end up in a relationship with an abuser. And even if she gets out of that, oftentimes will end up again in another relationship. And it's that idea that you're reenacting things that's unconscious. You're not trying to do that, to provide a situation where you can then resolve the trauma by prevailing and being the victor instead of the victim. I don't really need to say anything about that, but that's kind of what we're talking about. So we're talking a lot about unresolved trauma, but I like to point out that because we live in these bodies, we have the self-renewal capacity of healing from trauma. So if you think about getting a wound or a cut on the skin or a puncture, your body then kicks in a magnificent cascade of biochemistry and all sorts of things that happen. Blood goes to the area, white blood cells, the immune system kicks in, and the body is really designed to renew through continuous self-correction and healing. And I just want to say that that's true for the nervous system and the psyche and the spirit as well. So we do have the capacity for healing and renewal. All right, I'm going to dive in a little bit to this theory of the triune brain, with just a slight mention of the fact that it's a little bit outdated of a theory, apparently, I learned. But I find it's a little simplistic, but it's still useful, and it's not incorrect, if that makes sense. So these three levels of brain activity kind of are correlated to our evolutionary history. So the oldest part of our brain, the reptilian brain, is the brain stem. And that we have in common with reptiles. And really, it keeps us alive. It has to do with our body. It has to do with regulating our heart rate and certain instinctual drives like hunger and sex and thirst. And then we later developed into mammalian creatures where we then had to interact with other humans in order to survive and have community. And we started developing the limbic system of the brain, which is the midbrain. And in the midbrain, we have the limbic system and the amygdala, where we process big emotions and fear and survival and pleasure. And so this is where memory centers are. And like I mentioned in the beginning of the talk, when we have a stressful experience that has a high emotional charge on it, our limbic system is going to remember it so that it can keep us safe in the future. And then the rational part of our brain is the neocortex, and that's the newest part of the brain that's developed. And that we think of as our thinking brain or rational brain. So oftentimes people only work with their rational part of their brain or their neocortex when they're doing things like talk therapy. So if you feel stress, anxiety, trauma, it is important to talk about it. But I believe that we need to engage all three levels of the brain to help move past and really do that deep resolution of trauma work. So that means working with the limbic system and the emotional brain, and then also really allowing the body to come back into a sense of safety. So this is where we kind of get to talk about how awesome essential oils are and what a fantastic tool they are for healing our emotions, becoming more emotionally resilient, and allowing our limbic system to get a different signal than it's primed to look for fear. So we know that when we smell aromatic substances, the olfactory bulb in the nose is really closely linked to the limbic part of the brain. And so we can affect our emotional center instantly when we smell an essential oil. Isn't that cool? Pretty powerful. So one way that this can be useful is to create an anchor sensation. Like when you are using a certain oil, maybe you're using it in meditation or in a very calm, cool, and relaxed state. Oftentimes people report when they come to my office and I use essential oils here, they say, all I have to do is walk into your office and it smells so good, I already know that I'm feeling better. And what that does is it creates sort of an anchor where you're basically retraining your nervous system every time you smell that to say, it's going to be okay. You're connecting those two experiences. And at this point, I could just end the talk and say which oils are useful for trauma and stress, all of them, because they all, when we inhale them, are going to affect our limbic system. And so really, what I want you to know is that you can use whatever oils make you feel good. And end of discussion. You don't have to remember anything else. But of course, I do have some other ideas for you. So this is a wonderful resource. When our amygdala responds to a perceived threat and our nervous system gets activated and our cortisol and adrenaline rush in. But oftentimes when we're in that unresolved trauma state or even normal chronic stress patterns, we have a lot of negative self-talk. Well, you shouldn't be so responsive. Why are you so sensitive? We beat up on ourselves all the time. In fact, in my practice, I would say this is more common than not. It's very rare that I work with somebody who doesn't have a pretty hard time being nice to themselves. So Kristen Neff is a wonderful researcher who's done a lot of work into self-compassion, and she says that with self-criticism, we're both the attacker and the attacked. And so she's given us a tool to try to help get out of that pattern of reactivating our nervous system ourselves because we're attacking ourselves. So in order to engage the mammalian brain, so the limbic part of the brain, we can use these different tools. And the reason that it works is because, like I mentioned earlier, infants have a longer developmental phase when we're mammals. And so we've developed these different mechanisms to help keep families connected and keeps the babies alive. So soothing touch is going to release a hormone called oxytocin, which has to do with bonding and feeling love and compassion. And then also releases endorphins, which have the feel good, and they can overcome that sense of pain and helplessness. So the way this works, and I highly recommend using Forgive with it. Forgive is a beautiful blend that by itself can just help you move into a place of more self-compassion. But take a drop of Forgive, inhale it, and then the 3 steps are soothing touch, mindfulness, and common humanity. So the soothing touch, oftentimes I'll teach people just hold your hands over your heart softly, or maybe one hand on your heart, one hand on your belly. Another place that's helpful is the forehead, calm down that overactive brain. Or perhaps you might just give yourself a little hug, softly caressing your face. I mean, you might feel goofy, but it really works. So try it. Just do it by yourself, and that way it doesn't matter if you feel goofy. So you're going to give yourself a little caress and invoke the oxytocin and the endorphins. And then you're going to bring some mindfulness and intention to, you're going to acknowledge what's going on. And say to yourself, this is stressful. I'm in a lot of pain. I'm hurting right now. This is hard. I'm having a hard day. And just like beam that acknowledgement to yourself. And then the common humanity piece, I think oftentimes, especially in this day and age with social media, when we're suffering, we look out and it seems like everybody else has it together. And we feel like we're the only ones who can't seem to manage life and we're easily overwhelmed. So saying to yourself with that caress, this is stressful. You're having a hard day. But you know what? This is how it feels when people struggle this way. I'm not alone. Everyone experiences things like this at different times in their life. And just that can give you a moment, a self-compassion break of acknowledgement. And it's one of the resources that you can use when you are starting to go up that arousal curve and starting to feel overwhelmed. See. Don't worry, I'm not going to go into the slide in depth again, but I did want to bring it up again just so that you can see like things like that self-compassion break, or using your oils. There's a bunch of tools that are coming your way. They're going to help you as you come up that curve. They're going to help you just come back down again. And one of the key pieces of that is to start being more aware of where your nervous system is on this curve. So perhaps instead of just assuming that frustration and irritability are just common, normal, everyday things, when you notice you're feeling frustrated and irritable, say, what's going on? What can I do about it? And then it can bring you back down again. And the more tuned in you are to where you are on that curve, the more you'll be able to redirect it and come back down into a safe zone before you get knocked into dissociation or rage or panic. So another way of thinking about healing from trauma is this beautiful concept that was brought. I learned about it through Peter Levine's work, but you can see Ruby Jo Walker has a great website too, where she has a bunch of resources for trauma healing. I highly recommend that. But the idea here is that we're going along in life, we're the river of life, and we have a traumatic experience that is like a breach in the river. and it creates this little eddy and this little cyclone there. And as we're going along in our life, different things can activate us into feeling threatened again, and we can get sucked into the trauma vortex, and we just get carried away until we feel overwhelmed and not sure of ourselves, and back up in that blue zone really easily. So let me give you an example of that. Have any of you ever had the experience where maybe you don't eat that much breakfast and you have a bunch of errands to do, and you have the kids in the back of the car and you're out and you're doing errands, and all of a sudden you realize you're cranky, you have no patience, you're even a little like can't focus, can't remember what you're supposed to do, maybe a little shaky, and what's happening is your blood sugar's dropped. You need a snack, you need to eat some protein. But that feeling in your body of feeling irritable and cranky and shaky and out of control is kind of similar to feeling a panic attack coming on, or going up that arousal curve. And so you start to feel those physical sensations of low blood sugar, and you get sucked right back into that trauma vortex. And perhaps you lash out at your kids, or do something that, because you're not really in your safe zone of your nervous system. Let's see if I can think of another example of that. Sometimes even just having an argument or any sort of conflict, which is a normal part of life, right? With work, coworkers or spouses or whatever. But if you have that experience where you have this breach and this trauma vortex, the anger or anxiety that comes up when you have a conflict, an emotional conflict like that, can suck you into that trauma vortex, and then you just get sucked right in like you have no control. So one of the things that we're doing with these different exercises, and essential oils are a beautiful tool for this, is we're creating a countercurrent, which we call the healing vortex or the resiliency vortex. And so what we're doing is, on a daily basis, we're doing these things that are going to recreate a sense of safety in our bodies. Maybe we're going to add in some mindfulness meditation and some of these other therapies that I'll tell you about at the end. And so you're building your capacity for resilience. You're learning how to recognize what your nervous system feels like when it's on the start of that arousal curve. And so when things start to go haywire, when you start to notice you're irritable and cranky, you pull out a tool from your toolkit that's part of the resiliency vortex, and that counteracts it and keeps you from getting sucked into the trauma vortex. I find that helpful to think about it that way. Talking about pendulation is another way of talking about the same idea of the healing vortex. So you're moving between the dysregulated state and the regulated state by using your resources. And the cool thing about this is that we all have these primal rhythms of expansion and contraction, and it's not normal to be like constantly feeling optimistic and awesome and productive and powerful. We need to go through periods of more inner work and renewal and regrowth, and then we go into another expansive phase. So using our resources and this idea of pendulation, we're kind of doing this rocking sensation of, we're learning how to tolerate a little bit more of the nervous system activation because we have these resources that we can go back to. And the more you kind of pendulate back and forth between the dysregulated and the regulated state, the more you're building your capacity to feel feelings without getting sucked into the trauma vortex. Let's see. Peter Levine says, pendulation is an exercise to develop a relationship between the unresourced and the resourced parts of our consciousness or inner universe, between the lost and the found, the fragment and the whole. In the unhealed post-trauma scenarios, there's a highly activated, stressed state followed by a collapse into a very checked out, numb, deadened, apathetic, exhausted state. Hyperarousal or immobility, pressure cooker or limp ragdoll, frenzy or exhaustion. So this is the idea that we're slowly pendulating back and forth between the resourced and the unresourced to build our capacity for both. It's very important. So now I'm going to move into a bunch of resources that you can use, and I just want to give you the reminder that I'm not intending that you use all of them, but just see which ones resonate with you. This is a beautiful acupuncture point on the ear. So remember, I was talking about the Shen that resides in your heart. This is a point called the Heavenly Gate, and it can really help settle your Shen. These 3 oils are beautiful. The way you would use it is, let's see, I have neroli here. So you just put a little neroli on one finger, and then you can transfer it to the other finger. And then you find that little dimple in your ear. And while you're holding it, I recommend just closing your eyes and taking a couple slow breaths and really seeing if you can notice how it feels in your body. I start my day with this every day, and I start almost every treatment that I give to my patients with one of these oils on Shen Men, because I find that it calms and centers, brings people back so that then they're open and receptive to the treatment. All right, this is moving into some of the learning that I've done with the fragrance energetics side of things. And the euphoric oils are a whole class of oils that are, you can see here, neroli, jasmine, rose, lang lang, magnolia. When you smell them, you kind of are carried away into a little bliss bubble, as my teacher, Tiffany Pollard, says, which I love the idea of a bliss bubble. And we know that when there's trauma and there's pain and suffering, sometimes it can be too intense to bear. And that's one of the reasons why we dissociate or why we go to drugs and alcohol, because it takes us out of our pain. Well, this is a way that you can get a little relief and a little bliss bubble relief from your pain without the unhealthy side effects of those other substances. So, really just using them aromatically, intentionally with a couple deep breaths is wonderful. Breathe in, pause, and just allow yourself to feel what's going on. And then another way to use them, here I have jasmine here. I recommend doing it across your wrists and then holding your wrists together like this for 60 seconds or longer. And the reason is because there's some wonderful acupuncture points on the wrist. One is a heart point, again called Shen Men, on the wrist. And then in the center of the wrist is a point on the pericardium channel, and the pericardium is the heart protector. So we want to build a sense of safety and protection so that it's okay to allow ourselves to be who we really are. So try those activities. Also, you can use the euphorics can be really healing for any sort of sexual trauma, specifically jasmine, neroli, and magnolia. And you can use it on your low abdomen, or sometimes I'll just take the roller bottle and go all the way down my midline. Rose is beautiful heart medicine. So if you're feeling like your heart is a little shut down or you need a little extra support, you can use rose on your heart. It's a beautiful oil for that. So in order to think about that graphic again, think about the green zone at the bottom. That's our safe, where we feel safe. We feel like we can be present with people, we can connect, we can be our best selves. So we want to try to help the body and the nervous system and the emotional life come back to a sense of safety. In order to create that, we need to feel okay in our bodies. And oftentimes when there's been a trauma, physical trauma, sexual trauma, our body does not feel like a safe place anymore. So we're going to use resources, these essential oils as resources to help remind the body that it can be a safe place. And then we need to have this sense of acknowledgement and awareness and mindfulness about what's going on with us. Build a safety bubble, a sense of protection. And then also using oils can build the sense of nourishment, where we might feel like there was neglect or lack or some sort of like frozenness from being able to have our needs met. So we're going to go into these on a fragrance energetic level. So I love this tree. So when we talk about grounding, you can use an exercise where you can bring your awareness to your feet, maybe in standing or seated, and letting your eyes close and imagine you're growing roots out of your feet and into the ground. And that can be very, very helpful, because if you think about trees, they pull nutrients up from the ground and then distribute them to all their branches. But they also can get rid of stuff into the ground. So we can use that same imagery to help support us. We can let go of things that are feeling dense or too heavy to carry. Let it drain out your roots in your feet, and then pull in the resources that you need. This is a beautiful picture of vetiver, one of our rooty oils that comes from the roots of this hardy grass. And Peter Levine again talks about how important our grounding is and our felt sense in our body. So we're working to, like he says, uncouple the fear and the paralysis from the trauma. So we're helping the body feel more grounded and safe so that we can let that experience discharge out of us. So grounding oils, vetiver, balance, anchor are beautiful. You can use them on kidney 1, on the bottom of your feet, or even just rub them into the bottom of your feet whenever you feel like you need extra grounding. Vetiver is a beautiful oil that can be taken internally in a gel cap and can be quite comforting and sedating, as well as patchouli. My next oil. Patchouli is, on an emotional, energetic level, it's an oil of physicality. So it can be very useful for this embodied felt sense. It can be useful for regaining a sense of feeling okay in the body when there's been a violation or a breach. On a chemistry level, it's very restorative to the nervous system, and it's grounding and stabilizing. It's also really good for digestion. So sometimes with chronic stress and trauma, we have digestive problems. So you're getting all these benefits from patchouli. You can use it on the bottom of your feet. You can put it in a bath. You can put it in the diffuser. But I find a wonderful combination is here with pink pepper and copaiba in a gel cap for your nervous system. And like I mentioned earlier, if you want to try this, I would give it, 3 or 4 weeks of daily use to help. We're sending a signal to our body that we want it to change. So it's just going to take some time of repeated signaling to get the nervous system to get the message. When we think about mindfulness and acknowledgement, oftentimes when there's been trauma, there's a narrowing of our senses. There's a shutting down. Sometimes we don't really want to know. We might be hiding from ourselves. And these oils, the pungent oils and the lemony oils, can help open up our senses so that we can perceive and know more of what is true. And think about some of that confusion and brain fog that might be happening, especially if we can't make sense out of why something terrible happened to us, or who we can trust and who we can't trust. Also, if you find that you are somebody that's dealing with chronic stress or trauma by being in a state of collapse and depression, then these oils can lift and open. So pungent oils come up to the head and they bring clarity to the vision. And then the lemony oils are very uplifting and cheerful, and they move stagnation out. So these are your oils for the acknowledgement phase of healing. And there are more that fit into this category. So use your senses and figure out which oil is right for you. So when we feel like we need more of that nourishment, that sense of being held and like maybe a parent or mother who wasn't there for us, or that sense of mothering that we want, or fathering that we want, and we can't get it, well, we can get that same sense through using some of the sweet oils and spice oils. Sweet oils are harmonizing, they're regulating, they're nourishing and restoring. And you think about them like they move through your body like a gentle lullaby. They're not too strong. They're very nourishing and sweet and soft. And they send this signal to your nervous system that you're held and nourished and loved. These are some of my favorite sweet oils. And then the spice oils really nourish us. Think about your stomach and food. Our humanity, we've been evolving with these spice oils using in our food for forever and ever. So it's another way of sending a signal to the body that we're being nourished and cared for. And you can use these oils. The sweet oils are wonderful on your heart. You can use them on your heart point, on your wrist. And the spice oils are wonderful right on the belly, right around your belly button, or internally. I love using cardamom in my smoothies every morning, also great for digestion. And then lastly, if we're trying to rebuild this sense of safety, we want to impart a sense of protection. It's hard to relax our hypervigilant state if we can't have that sense that we're going to be protected and taken care of. So energetically, we use melaleuca, lemongrass, and clove for energetic protection. You can use those in your diffuser. You can use those topically on the bottom of your feet, on your belly. And then grounded and rooty oils like vetiver, patchouli, and spikenard can really help with that sense of protection as well too. Like we're solid. We got this. And then woody oils like cedarwood, sandalwood, juniper berry have their energetics is centering and stabilizing. So if you think about trees and how rooted they are and how strong and firm they are in their stance, that's how woody oils make you feel. And so you can use those on your center and on your abdomen and in the diffuser, and all sorts of ways to help send the signal to your nervous system that you're protected, you're grounded, you're centered, you can't be thrown off your base. Just as an aside, on an emotional level, spikenard is the oil of, releasing victimhood? You get out of victim mode or something like that, which is also another useful way to use spikenard. So as I was making this presentation, I just I couldn't stop. There were just so many different oils that'll be useful. And this is not an exhaustive list either, but I thought I would share with you these beautiful oils. So these are from the Emotional Healing book. And then this is a blend that I make and use with my patients. You can kind of see all the all the reasons that I chose them. It has I'd say it has an overall sort of euphoric smell to it when it comes together, but because it has a little bit of vetiver in there that has that anchor, you're not completely carried away in the bliss. And then frankincense, the resin oils, also have that centering and aligning, and frankincense is, the oil of truth. So it's a very powerful oil for bringing us back to who we really are. You might be wondering how to use this oil. You're going to be making it in a roll-on, and so it's really great topically, again, on the wrists. You can hold the wrists together. I would definitely try the heart, or maybe all the way up and down the midline. And then I love it on the back of the neck so that the brain is getting the signal as well. But really, however you're called to use it is going to be right. And then this is another blend that I developed for my patients based on, these are more of the pungent oils. And all of these oils are known to help increase our capacity to create new neural connections in our brain. So when we're trying to get out of reliving an old stuck pattern that's really not healthy for us anymore, we need to do things that are going to help us create new pathways, and revive the mind is wonderful. And also just a great blend for, if you're studying or doing homework and you really want to clear your mind up. Well, I wouldn't really be doing my job if I didn't mention how important it was to build a strong nutritional foundation for any sort of healing. These vitamins are some of the best vitamins I've seen, and I am kind of snooty. I'm a naturopath, kind of snooty about our vitamins. So what do we have here? We have omega-3 fatty acid blend. And we know that the omega-3 fatty acids are so important to our brain development. So if you are somebody that's under chronic stress or trauma, and you're deficient in your omega-3s, it's going to be really hard to change some of these patterns. And omega-3s are so good for the brain and the heart and our joints and our skin. You really can't go wrong. We all need them. It's very difficult to get enough from our diet. So that's a really important foundational piece. If you're having any sort of distractibility, they can help with mood, attention, any sort of brain-related issue. And then we have on the top there, you see the Microplex VMZ, which is basically a mineral and vitamin supplement that is food-based, very well absorbed and used by the body. And so one of the things that we know is that being under chronic stress and dealing with situations of trauma is very depleting to the body. It uses up our nutrients more than living a nice, relaxed, privileged lifestyle. So this is going to just provide the foundational, so that all the enzymes and reactions that go on in the body to make our neurotransmitters and build new tissues and repair and restore, it's going to have all the ingredients that it needs. And then lastly, the alpha CRS is a beautiful antioxidant blend. So we know that inflammation is at the root of most chronic disease, and stress is a major driver of inflammation. So alpha CRS is basically like taking a fire hose to all that inflammation in your body and really calming everything down. So then you can have a better foundation to do your healing work. I've seen these vitamins help so many people who are struggling with mental and emotional difficulties. that I think it would be foolish not to start there with everybody. All right, other cool stuff that I do, there's lots of different resources for healing from trauma, but I just wanted to share a little bit about what I do know. I use something called lens neurofeedback in my practice. It's a brainwave biofeedback that helps disrupt old patterns and create new neural patterns. Some tension and trauma releasing exercise are very, let's see, it's a series of exercises to get into a self-induced tremor. So a tremor is a physical way that our body uses to discharge stuck fight or flight from our body. So if you think about that arousal curve, we're going up, 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 activating for defense, and then coming back down the other side requires techniques like this to allow your body to release that buildup of epinephrine and cortisol. Emotional freedom technique is tapping. Can be very useful. I teach it, but there's also a lot of widely available resources on the internet. If you've never done it before, you can teach yourself and do it quite safely. I've been using Muse, the brain sensing headband, with myself and my patients, and it's basically another biofeedback tool that you wear when you're meditating, and it gives you feedback based on your brain waves. You hear sounds from your phone, like wind sounds when the weather gets really crazy, when your brain is really active, and then it calms down and you hear birds chirping. So it's a useful tool to help you learn how to meditate and calm your brain down. Rescue Remedy is a wonderful flower essence, which is wonderful to have on hand for those moments when you feel you're going up that arousal curve and you notice. You can take a little Rescue Remedy. Flower essences are very gentle, wonderful way to shift patterns in the psyche. And then I just mentioned EMDR. It's not something that I practice, but I do refer to therapists who use EMDR because it can be another wonderful tool for moving out of stuck trauma. All right. I really am excited to share with you. I want to introduce my friend Melissa McLean, who I've been working with for about a year. She's a friend and now a doTERRA wellness advocate as well. We met a year ago, and I'm going to let her tell you a little bit about her story about how she got diagnosed with PTSD and the tools she's been using to help. But it's been really fun to share this last year with her because my understanding of healing from trauma has grown significantly from our conversations, and I'm so appreciative. Thank you for being here, Melissa.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yay, I can hear you. So for our audience, just tell us briefly about how you got a diagnosis of PTSD and what that meant to you at the time.
Sure. So about 3.5, 4 years ago, I was in a really high stress job. I'd spent my career in crisis management, essentially working with private companies and government agencies to prepare for and respond to mass casualty events like plane crashes and terrorist attacks, and unfortunately have responded to quite a few of those things. And so just the emotional toll and the 24/7 on call had really started to take its toll on me. And I went in and I was struggling and saw a therapist, and she diagnosed me with PTSD. And I was kind of like, I don't have PTSD. Like, I didn't go to war. I'm not a soldier. Like, it totally downplayed the diagnosis, and actually didn't go back and see her after that. And about 3 or 4 months later, I kind of hit rock bottom, honestly, and I quit my job. And once I quit and I really had to sit and get in touch with what was happening in my body and in my mind, I realized that, yeah, there was something going on there. And with research and sort of the healing process, determined that, yeah, I did have PTSD.
Were you having some of the physical problems that we were talked about, like insomnia, digestive things, like anything like that?
Not so much insomnia. I've had digestive problems as long as I can remember. And I think probably my biggest issue was anxiety, and just a complete inability to regulate my physical and my emotions. Because my adrenaline would just take over. And it had been doing it for year after year after year, but I had something to do. I had a job to do. I had people to help. And so I just stuffed it, numbed it, did what I had to do to get through and take care of other people. And I didn't take care of myself. And so when I quit, all of that stuff was still happening in my body and I had nowhere to put it. And so I just had to sit there. And so as you're talking about the curve, I totally see myself in that so strongly, because I was kind of up here. I was in that numbing. I was in the emotion, the anger, the anxiety, all of that. And the last 2-3 years has been about bringing myself down that curve and getting back to a place of regulation. And the trigger still happened, but I now have tools, thanks to you and others, to bring myself back down quickly and live in a much more comfortable place within my body.
Yeah. So I know Melissa was the one who introduced me to the Muse headband. So I know that was one of the first tools that you used to learn how to come back to your body and come back to your breath.
Yes.
And then when we worked together at the retreat last year, you learned TRE, which is the shaking and the tremoring. I know that's been a big part of your healing.
Yeah.
But I know everybody would love to hear your top tips for oils that have been useful for you, and maybe they've changed over the years, and just tell us a little bit about the oils that you've used and how they've been helpful.
Yeah, I think sort of my first trauma oils were jasmine and neroli. I was actually really struggling with some anxiety around I'm not even sure I remember what it was. It may have been a aviation accident or a school shooting that happened about 6 months ago, 8 months ago. And I was really struggling. And I had actually the month before bought jasmine and neroli and hadn't really used them, but I knew that they were good for trauma and was really struggling. And one day my body was just like, where is it? And I grabbed the jasmine and the neroli and just started using them. And they became a constant for probably about a month, just every day using them. And my body was just literally like craving them. And then I got to a point where I kind of tailored off of them. They were always there and available for me, but it wasn't this constant need. They had kind of done their job and helped me through that tough spot when I was going up on that trigger curve. And so they've been great. The last couple of weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, I've been using Magnolia quite a bit. The new Magnolia, absolutely love it. I came back from convention. There's been a lot of stuff going on in our world the last couple of weeks, and it's been a little rough. And so Magnolia has been a constant on my desk during the day, grabbing it, putting it on a regular basis. And I literally can feel my nervous system relax when I use the Magnolia. So it's now in the threesome.
Do you use it here mostly, or how do you use
Actually,
it?
I've been rolling it. The Sanjao, yes, you told me that. Yeah.
Yep.
So that's where I use the Magnolia, and then jasmine I use on my wrist and down, and then also on my abdomen.
And what about, remember that time you told me about your shoulders dropping 5 inches or whatever that was?
Yeah, that was actually that was jasmine. When I first started using it, I literally would put it on and just kind of sit there for a minute, and I would feel my shoulders just drop. Yeah, pretty incredible.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Would you mention where people can learn more about you if they're interested in learning more about how to get a Muse headband? Or Melissa also does some other wonderful programs that have to do with creativity and mindfulness programs. And so people might want to know more about that. How can they learn more about you?
Sure. You can go to my website. It's senseofmind.com. And there you will find mindfulness, as well as I do some creativity programs, as Louise said, and also some photography, which is my sort of my self-care and the way I really get in tune with my body and my senses and release a lot of the stress that's going on in my
Beautiful.
life.
And for those of you who are essential oil users, it's not sense as in SCENTS, it's sense as in SENSE, sense of mind. But thank you so much. Is there anything else that we forgot to share? Oh, tell them about how recently you've been able to watch the news and not get that.
Yeah. So I was, I'm studying to become a TRE provider, thanks to Dr. Rose. And I was reading one of the trauma books a couple weekends ago. And as I was reading through, just kind of out of nowhere, they had a section in there that they were really heavily discussing plane crashes. And it kind of didn't dawn on me at first. And then after a few minutes, I was like, oh, I've read page after page after page, and I am not feeling anything in my body the way I used to feel just watching something on TV or reading a story about something and going back in my mind and in my body to, you know, disaster responses and things like that. It's just sort of just not there anymore.
So you didn't get sucked into the trauma vortex.
I did not. Yeah. There's still some there. I was reading something the other day that took me back a little bit. So, you know, they're still there, but I have the tools now to be with my body, understand what's happening, not dive into it and make it worse by, as you were talking about, ruminating on it. I have the oils to soothe me, and TRE is there as a tool to release a lot of that trauma and energy that my body is holding on to. And I think that the combination of those three things have really just been magic for me in my healing.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Another thing that Melissa and I have talked about throughout the year is that when you have experienced trauma, one of the hallmarks of that experience is that you have lost control over your life and your situation. You have gotten into a place that you can't get out of. And so it's a very, disempowering feeling. And one of the ways that essential oils are so useful as a resource for us is that as we're healing, we're learning how to be more in touch with what our body's saying, and whether it's just, I have a stomach ache, or I have muscle pain, or, anything that's going on. Once we start to feel it again and are more in touch with our body's signals, then we can say, oh, I have a stomach ache. I know I can do something about that. I'm going to reach for my Digest-Zen and roll it on my stomach. And that is a very empowering act to be able to identify what's going on and reach for a tool and help yourself when you need it. And that is, I think, also part of that resource healing aspect.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. It is really empowering to know that I can take care of myself. I can help myself. And I have all the tools here, both within me and with the oils.
Thank you so much, Melissa, for adding your story to this webinar. I think it'll show people that there's a lot of hope out there, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Here are just some of the references that I used. If you're interested in reading any of these books or looking anything up, just pause there for a minute. And then thank you very much for your attention. Here's a little bit more about me. You can find me at rosecabinetmedicine.com. I'm on Instagram, Facebook. These are some of the things that I do and offer throughout the year. And I love getting feedback from people. So shoot me an email if you want.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rose, and thank you, Melissa, for joining us live today. Dr. Rose, I do have a couple questions quickly because I know we're way over on time today, so thanks to everyone for sticking with us. But there was a question that came in about how to best manage panic attacks. And I thought that was a great question that a lot of people could learn from. So do you have any advice on maybe possible prevention and or if somebody is in that panic attack state, what to do about it?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So ideally what you'll do is you'll start tuning into that nervous system arousal curve before you reach that point. And notice when you're starting to feel agitated, and then you can use a resource that's easier to get out of. But if you find yourself, and sometimes people just wake up in the middle of the night in a panic attack, and so you have no warning. One of the things that I actually believe is that not trying to push it away. So trust that it's your body is trying to actually discharge that energy. It's stuck fight or flight that's trying to get out of you. So anything that you can do that's physical, like shaking or pushing on something or stomping around, you're going to be using your big muscles. You're going to be activating some of those release mechanisms. And that can give you something to do rather than just what happens is that it's this small feedback loop where you feel like you're panicking and then you focus on the fact that you can't breathe and it builds on itself. So giving yourself something to do, even if it's just really just shake, 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 shake. Or, like Melissa would do, I would reach for, jasmine or neroli and try to, use it on your wrists, use it on your inhale it. Inhaling an oil is automatically going to do something to you. So probably any oil that you have on hand is going to be useful. Another thing that I didn't mention during the talk, but it can be useful. So a panic attack is, not quite in the flooding and dissociating phase, but it's right close to it. And for some people who have experienced a lot of trauma, actually dissociating is quite common for them. And once you start working with your nervous system and start recognizing when you dissociate, like maybe you just like, wow, I didn't realize, I don't know where I was for a minute or two. Using those pungent oils like the eucalyptus and the rosemary and maybe peppermint can really help you come back to yourself after dissociation. And so that might be useful for a panic attack too. It's so I would go for either the euphorics or a pungent like peppermint or eucalyptus or rosemary.
Perfect. Thank you. I have a friend who suffers from panic attacks, and she's found breathe to be very helpful.
Yeah.
She'll bring it up, and it might also just be the action of taking the long, deep breaths with the breathe. I think, like you said, any oil you have in your purse, you should give that a try, and you'll find your favorites. There is one question from Diane here. Let me see if maybe her hand went down. Okay, we are so late on. Oh, let's see. Diane, do you have a question? I thought your hand was up. Hold on. I'm going to allow you to talk. So if you want to come on and ask super fast, because I know this is an important conversation. Diane, I'm unmuting you. Oh, nope, that was her dog. Okay, never mind. Okay. Well, there's one more question. Do you ever use Console blend with trauma patients?
Absolutely. There's so many oils that I didn't even touch on. I mean, there's Console, Peace, all those emotional oils are going to be useful. So really just, like I said, work with whatever is calling to you. And definitely Console can be useful. Anchor, I love. And that on the panic attack too, I mentioned EFT at the end, the tapping could be really useful for panic attack, but even if you're too disoriented to do that, just tapping on your chest is helpful for fear.
Yeah, absolutely.
Use an oil, tap on your chest.
I love that. Also, Peace has the oil vetiver in it. And vetiver has been referred to as a liquid Valium. You can actually take vetiver straight under your tongue, but that can also be very calming for anxiety and also very supportive for sleep and very grounding. And again, it's in the Peace blend. We could just talk about all the great oils all day long, couldn't we?
Yeah, they're all going to be helpful. You need them all.
Why don't you go ahead and go to the next slide and we'll wrap it up. So if you have come to this webinar via a referral from a friend or a Facebook link, and you're not necessarily connected to our community, we invite you to join us. So please circle back and talk to the person that invited you, and they can share with you the very best way to get your essential oils. And this month, this webinar is happening in October. We have some great deals from the company that they can share with you. And we recommend that you join us. And from joining our Essential Wellness community, then you also get access to these monthly webinars and the recordings and team calls and Facebook support, and we have a huge community of support for you. If you come to this webinar and you are not connected to anyone in particular that invited you, but you just found it, I know I've posted it on several different Facebook pages and such, you can contact us directly at info@essentialwellness.life, and we will help get you started. So again, Dr. Rose, thank you so much. This is a really important conversation and information that so many of us need. I really appreciate your time and sharing your expertise with us. Super valuable. I hope you all have a beautiful day, and we will look forward to connecting with all of you next month. So we'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.